As we continue with part 2 of today's lesson, we're going to just have a look at the last couple of things in chapter 1. You will see that we're going to explore Dorian's feelings about Basil as he perceives them. And then further on in the chapter, there are some other things that are mentioned about Dorian by Lady Agatha, that's Lord Henry's aunt. I'm not going to say anything about those. They will just be highlighted on the page in blue as we move through to the end of the chapter, and you can just make notes for yourselves about that. So we pick it up from where we left off in the last part, and Henry asks Basil how he sees Dorian's view of him. And he answers with this. We're on page 17, paragraph 4. The painter considered for a few moments. He likes me, he answered after a pause. I know he likes me. Of course, I flatter him dreadfully. I find a strange pleasure in saying things to him that I know I shall be sorry for having said. As a rule, he is charming to me. And next sentence, now and then, however, he is horribly thoughtless and seems to take a real delight in giving me pain. Then I feel, Harry, that I have given away my soul to someone who treats it as if it were a flower to be put in his coat, a bit of decoration to charm his vanity, an ornament for a summer's day. What is important about this is what we learn about Dorian, that he certainly has the appearance of being charming, and it would seem that most of the time he is. But within him, there's a capacity to do harm. And we're going to explore that in quite a lot of detail in chapter 2 and then subsequent chapters, particularly when he meets up with Sybil Vane. But the idea is that Basil does see his potential to be nasty and potentially to be evil, but he also does excuse it. He almost feels as if he's been caught up in his feelings for him, and he forgives him for what he is. And we see that again in chapter 12. But it's really important. It's something that you must note about Dorian Gray. It's a quote that you might want to write down, where he says he is horribly thoughtless and seems to take a real delight in giving me pain. And then we pick up with Henry again, who puts his spin on this. And in the next paragraph, a couple of lines down, he says, there is no doubt that genius lasts longer than beauty. That accounts for the fact that we all take such pains to over-educate ourselves. So once again, we see the cynic in Henry. His view of people's motives for doing things is very, very cynical. And he looks at the idea that even education is simply because we want to have some sort of a legacy that we leave behind. Further down in that paragraph, it's about 10 lines down in the paragraph, he has this view about what will happen to the relationship between Basil and Dorian. And he suggests that Basil will tire of Dorian. And he continues and he says, you will bitterly reproach him in your heart and seriously think that he has behaved very badly to you. The next time he calls, you will be perfectly cold and indifferent. It will be a great pity, for it will alter you. What you have told me is quite a romance, a romance of art, one might call it, and the worst of having a romance of any kind is that it leaves one so unromantic. Now, of course, this interpretation of the relationship tells us much more about Henry than it does about Dorian or Basil, in the sense that Henry does not see relationships as enduring. He sees relationships in terms of people becoming tired of one another and hurting one another, and that they lose their luster, if you like, as the relationship continues. They lose the romantic quality about them. And that tells us a lot about Henry. That tells us once again that Henry is not interested in emotional connection between people, and that it would seem that Henry tires of relationships, and when they no longer serve their purpose for him, or they no longer entertain him, he is very likely to terminate the relationship. And in complete contrast to that, in the next paragraph, Basil's response: "Harry, don't talk like that. As long as I live, the personality of Dorian Gray will dominate me." And we get this very, very clear distinction in the way that Basil and Henry view life and relationships in those two quotes. It's a very nice way to contrast them. And then we pick up on Henry as the predator again. In the very next paragraph, he has some very cynical things to say. So he starts off and he says, my dear Basil, that is exactly why I can feel it. Those who are faithful know only the trivial side of love. It is the faithless who knows love's tragedies." Now that's an important view on relationships that we're going to pick up again when we see how he manages the fallout between Dorian and Sybil Vane. So just mark it off as something again that tells us about Henry's view of people. And then we have some description. We have again a description to create some atmosphere for us, about 5 lines down in the paragraph. "There was a rustle of chirruping sparrows in the green lacquer leaves of the ivy, and the blue cloud shadows chased themselves across the grass like swallows. How pleasant it was in the garden, and how delightful other people's emotions were, much more delightful than their ideas, it seemed to him. One's soul and the passions of one's friends, those were the fascinating things in life." The quote that's highlighted, how delightful other people's emotions were, much more delightful than their ideas, again alerts us to the predator in Harry. He is fascinated by people. They entertain him, and he is able to manipulate them for his entertainment, but he does not engage with them on an emotional level. And that's really, really important about his character, and we're going to see it very, very clearly in chapter 2 when he meets Dorian Gray. So you'll see the highlights there, a couple of other things about Dorian Gray, and then we pick it up where where Harry says he wishes he had known Dorian, that he had known that this was who Lady Agatha was talking about. And Basil says to Harry, "I don't want you to meet him." Now that's a really, really important observation from Basil's part, because it tells us that Basil recognizes the danger of Henry, and that he doesn't want Henry to have anything to do with Dorian. He is afraid of what Henry could do to Dorian. So that quote is about halfway down page 19. And Henry feigns surprise. "You don't want me to meet him?" "No." And of course, ironically, as he says that Dorian Gray's presence is announced by the butler. So I want now to pick it up in the last paragraph on page 19 as the chapter closes off. "Then he," that is Basil, "looked at Lord Henry. 'Dorian Gray is my dearest friend,' he said. 'He has a simple and a beautiful nature. Your aunt was quite right in what she said of him. Don't spoil him. Don't try to influence him. Your influence would be bad. There's Basil's understanding of Harry. As much as he is his friend, he recognizes him for who he is. He recognizes that Harry is dangerous, manipulative, and will be a bad influence on someone who is naive or unaware of the danger of Lord Henry Wotton. So that is a very, very important quote that describes Henry for us. And how does Basil know this? It would seem that he would have seen Henry do this to people. He would have seen Henry spoil people or influence them negatively. Remember, I said to you that Henry is an amoral character. He is not concerned with right and wrong. He is concerned with hedonism, what entertains him, what is pleasurable, what is fun, the whole idea of the pursuit of pleasure. And so it would not concern him whether he's a positive or a negative influence on a character. He would simply use them for his own entertainment. So that's the end of chapter 1. I have uploaded for you a little worksheet which I'd like you to have a look at. So you can read that for yourself. So don't forget to go to that link. And then tomorrow, on Monday, we will start with chapter 2, where we actually meet Dorian Gray face to face, and we'll see what develops from that. We'll chat on Monday. Bye.